Hello everyone, welcome to my channel, Jackalope Hope. I'm Hope, and today I'll be doing the History of My Bookshelf Challenge. I actually recorded most of this video last night, but I never managed to get a good intro because my voice kept going all kinds of crazy. It took me about 3 or 4 tries to get a recording I was happy with. So here's the new intro. But anyway, I just want to mention before we get started that this challenge was created by Emma Books last month, and I will link her original video down below. And without further ado, let's get started. Obviously, I wasn't tagged to do this challenge. I'm new. It's gonna be the first video that I record, but I thought it would be a fun way to do a quick overview of the kinds of things that I read, or at least the things that I have read, and the things that I own. And also to just look at my shelf, look at the history of it, and have that in mind as I'm moving into the next year and deciding what I'm going to read. I didn't actually record myself finding all of the books, because if you see this, I'm directionally challenged. This bookshelf back here, these kind of 3 lower shelves are all my books, the rest are my mom's books, so I didn't have a good way to record myself going back and forth between this shelf and the several shelves in the other room where the rest of my books are stored, so I didn't bother to record it. I did, however, set a stopwatch, so I'll put that somewhere on the screen, but it took me approximately 33.5 minutes to find a book for all of these questions. I think I just had one that I didn't have anything for. If you see me looking down, it's because I have everything written in my handy-dandy little notebook here. And I keep looking down at that instead of the notes that I have on my screen because I actually wrote the titles down here. Let's get cozy first. Get cozy. Everybody get comfy, get some tea, get a jacket, and then come back. So the first thing on the list is the oldest book on your shelf. And I wasn't sure which direction to take this. I think some people have been doing the book they owned the longest, but simply because it was easier for me to get to, I decided to go with the oldest written book on my shelf, which is Beowulf, which I believe was written, I want to say like the 13th century or possibly earlier. I don't really remember. So I apologize if I'm wrong on that. I was wrong. The original manuscript of Beowulf dates to between 975 and 1025 AD. The next item on the list is a book you read in 2013. The next several items on the list were all books that were read in specific years, and I only just started keeping track of what I'm reading when. So all of the books that I mention here, except for the book for 2019, are books that I read for school. So just want to put that out there because I know it's not going to be like the most interesting selection of books. So something that I read for school in 2013 is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I think most of us read this at least in American high school. This is pretty common high school reading, but if you're not familiar with it, it's about this guy narrating his story of meeting this wealthy man in 1920s New York and learning the story of how he came by his wealth and why, and how he's in love with this young woman who I believe is the cousin of the narrator, a distant cousin of the narrator. And so it's all about that man's quest to prove his love to this woman, and somehow it's about the American dream. I don't remember how. Book I read in 2014, also again from school, is Grendel by John Gardner. This is actually a retelling of Beowulf. This is why I own that copy of Beowulf. But this is a retelling of Beowulf from the perspective of Grendel, who is the monster. And we had to read this for my senior year for AP English. I think everybody had to read this one, and then AP also had to read Frankenstein. But our teacher always did a monster-themed summer reading project. So we read Grendel for that. And I really love this book. I think the writing is really cool and interesting. I really enjoy getting the monster's perspective. And it was a good book for a summer reading project. It wasn't too dense. I'm walking off frame because I have to put the books over there. So the book I read in 2015 is this going to be on the correct side? Yes. Where Am I Wearing? By Kelsey Temmerman. This was the Common Reads book at my university when I started there, and it's all about the author having this experience of looking at the tags in his favorite clothing and realizing that he just really wants to know about the lives of the people that made his favorite clothing. So he went on this big journey across the globe to, as best he could, try to meet people that worked in the factories where his clothing was made and just learn what their lives are like. And it's a really interesting look at the clothing industry. And also, the author came to our school for a talk later in the year, and we got to meet him, so he signed it. And it says, "Where are you wearing?" I can't hands. And then a book that I read in 2016, also for school. Again, these are all for school, except for the 2019 one. But a book I read in 2016 is... that's I don't want to be on. It's Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is the story of a young man named Raskolnikov who, to prove a point, kills somebody. I was a psychology major and sociology major as well, and so this was right up my alley because it's very much about the psychological processes of guilt and justification and about what it's like to do something like that and then have to live with the consequences. If you're at all interested in psychology, I think this is a great book. I know it's quite intimidating and a lot of people really don't like it. I personally loved it. The book I read in, what was the next year, 2017, is Mother Tongue by Demetria Martinez. This is one I read for a class on literary cartography, which is all about how space and place are important to stories, whether that's spaces and places in the stories, or the spaces and places where you read a story, or where the author is from, or where you're from, and just how all of those different spaces and places are important to stories. And this story is about a young Hispanic woman living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, with her aunt, and she's in the process of becoming more independent and kind of figuring out who she is as a person. And during that time, she and her aunt take in this young man who is a refugee from El Salvador, which is experiencing a massive civil war at the time. My cat wants out. I'll put a picture of my cat on the screen. He's a good boy. His brother's over here, just chilling. But this book is just about her getting to know this refugee that is living with them, and Elwood, my dude, in or out? You gotta choose. He doesn't gotta choose. He knows I'm gonna keep opening the door for him. You can get it. I realized after exporting this video that I forgot to include the book that I read for 2018. So for 2018, I read Sonara Taylor's Beasts of Burden, which is a book where she lays out an argument that disability rights and animal rights are very closely connected, and that we need to address both of them to address either of them, and it's primarily due to the kinds of language that we use to talk about these subjects. It was a book that I read for a contemporary theory in sociology class that I was taking in college at the time, and it's a really interesting book, but I neglected to mention it in my previous recording, so I wanted to go ahead and create this little blurb. So there you go. That's what I read in 2018. So that was a book I read in 2018. This is a book I read in 2019. This is Think of a Number by John Verdon. This is the only one on this list of specific year ones that I didn't read for school. And this one is a mystery, and it's specifically about a detective named Dave Gurney, who is known for being very highly logical to a fault, where he has trouble in relationships with other people because he just overthinks everything. But he's also, because he's so logical, an excellent detective, because he's very good at picking up patterns and connections that other people miss. But in this novel, he, because of that reputation, is contacted by an old college friend of his who he hasn't talked to in years, who has become this motivational speaker and spiritual leader, and this guy contacts him to get some help and some suggestions on next steps on dealing with some weird letters that he's been getting that are kind of creepy, they're a little bit threatening, and he just seeks some help, and he thinks that Dave Gurney is the person to ask. So now that we're out of the specific year ones, the next thing is a book that you've read more than once. For me, this one is Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. I actually have several I've read more than once, but this is one of my favorites. So we're going with this one. But it's about a young man named Louis. There's a lot of young people in these, aren't there? It's about a young man named Louis who is a plantation owner in, I want to say 1700s America, in New Orleans, or just outside of New Orleans. And subsequent to the death of his brother, he ends up becoming a vampire. It's related, I promise. His brother dies, he ends up becoming a vampire, and then he has to reconcile his former life as a devout Catholic with his new existence as a vampire and as a kind of killing machine. So the next one is a book that you waited over a year to be published, and I have a slight problem with this. First of all, I was wrong. I wrote something down and then realized I didn't wait over a year for it to be published. I waited a year for it to be published. But it's the closest thing I have, so I'm using it. I didn't notice that until like earlier today, but that's the wrong side. This is Die and Stay Dead by Nicholas Kaufman. This is the sequel to his book Dying is My Business, and it came out, the first one came out in October 2013, this came out in October 2014. So I thought that I had waited more than a year, but I was wrong, because I read the first one when I got it from the library right after it came out. And then I went and got this one as soon as they got it. Kind of following on from the first book, it follows a man named Trent who, in the first book, realizes that he can't die. And in this one, I believe they're trying to stop a cult. He's not a leader, just this cult dude. They're trying to stop him from summoning a world-destroying demon. And all of the names of the books are puns on the fact that he can't die. I really love the Trent trilogy, as it's called. It's called a trilogy, so I guess technically for this I could go with the third book of that series, because I'm still waiting for it. It's still not been published. It probably never will be. The author has said that he's unlikely to write the third book at the moment because the first two didn't sell very well, which is unfortunate, I think, because I really like them, and I may never find out what happens. After that, the next thing is a book you read on vacation or away from home. I have one that I've read mostly away from home. I read it at my aunt's house because I found it in a pile of books she was going to discard. But this is The Pride of the Peacock by Victoria Holt, and I don't know how to describe this book exactly. I don't know what genre it is. I haven't looked to find out what it's categorized as, but it's got a little bit of everything. It's a little bit of romance, it's a little bit of mystery, it's a little bit of thriller, it's a little bit of adventure. It's kind of a lot of things. But it's all about a young woman named Jessica, and I don't remember the exact time period, but certainly not modern. She is in this family. They used to live in this big manor. They don't anymore because her father gambled all their money away, because she feels kind of neglected by her family and like she doesn't quite fit in with them. They're very different temperaments to her. She ends up befriending the elderly man who's moved into the house that they used to live in, and everything kind of bleeds on from there, so I can't say too much else. The next thing is a book that you got from someplace special, anything that's not your local bookstore or online retailer. So I have Romping Through Dorian Gray, which doesn't actually have an author, apparently. Not that I can find, but it's all about the picture of Dorian Gray. It's just a little companion book. But one of the cool things in here is that it has this thing called the Wild Dublin Walk and a little map. And it's all these different places in Dublin that would have been important to Oscar Wilde during his life, either places that he lived, places that he would have frequented, things like that. And it gives you a little bit of information about him, and Oscar Wilde is one of my favorite authors, and I had the wonderful fortune of being able to study abroad in Dublin, and so I bought this book there, and while I was there, I had a friend, kind of last minute found out a friend was going to be able to come visit me, and so while she was there, she's also a fan of Oscar Wilde, and we walked around Dublin and did this wild walk. I think the next thing is a book that made me cry, and I chose Redwall by Brian Jakes. This is a children's book, mostly. It's a little bit dark for a children's book, frankly, but I read this probably in like 4th or 5th grade. But towards the end of this book, there is a major character death that, as a small child, very much upset me, and I cried a lot. the next item on the list is a book you read on one sitting. So I have Chronicle of a Death Foretold by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. This book is, first of all, very small. Second of all, I read it about a year ago. I got it last year at Christmas while family was visiting, and I read it just the day that I bought it. And this book is about a small town in Spain, and somebody gets murdered, and everybody knew it was going to happen. They all knew this guy was going to get murdered. So the entire book is explaining the events of how did we get here? How did we get to a point where somebody got murdered and no one did anything about it despite knowing that it was going to happen? I don't know how to describe it. There's a lot of swearing in it. So be forewarned or foretold. That's a terrible pun, I'm sorry. The next one is a book that was a gift, and this is The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I think that's incorrect. I took a year of French, but I took it online, and I didn't get to speak it while I was taking it, so I can read French decently, but I can't pronounce it. So this one was, I think, a Christmas gift from my uncle when I was very small. I have never finished this book. I was terrified of the snake. The next thing is a book you read before owning it. Either you got it from the library or borrowed it from a friend. And I have Dying is My Business, which is the first book in the Trin trilogy. The next thing on the list is a book that you lent to someone. So I have Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. I'm looking at it real closely because I realized I filmed this whole video a few days ago without noticing that I had actually said Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone several times, and even pulled out Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, despite this one being the one with the little note card on the front that says thanks, because I loaned it to I think it was my mom's friend's son. Yeah. This would also work for the next question, which is a book that was damaged, but this is also the only book that I have actually lent to someone that I currently still own, so it had to be this one for this question. So instead, for a book that was damaged, I have, if I can reach it, White Fang by Jack London. This was my favorite book as a kid. I got it secondhand, and it was already not in great condition, but, like, that's all me. A lot of this front cover bending is me from having it in my backpack a lot. The next one is a book that you got discounted or on sale. So I bought this one, The Devil in the White City by Eric Larson. It's a nonfiction. I got this actually in the town that I used to live in that was a small mountain town, and we had this bookstore that was connected to our library. The proceeds from the bookstore went to fund the library, and I volunteered there with my mom a lot, several years in a row during this big book sale they did every February. And so I got this book. It was already secondhand, so it was cheap, but I think I ended up getting it for half off the price they had written into it, so I think we got it for like $1. This was like $2, and I think everything was 50% off for the sale. So I got this book for like $1, and it's definitely worth it. And the fun thing about this particular book was that I had been wanting to read this. My aunt had recommended this to me because I was really interested in several of the topics that this book covers, which are architecture and serial killers and just the 1800s in general, late 1800s specifically. But this particular book I'd looked for already when we got there because I always restocked my book stock during the annual sale, and couldn't find it anywhere, wasn't on any of the shelves, and then much later in the day, one of the shelves had started to empty out, so my mom went to the back part of the store to see if there were any more books in the crate that was for restocking this particular shelf, and this was the only book that was in the box. So we pulled it aside and bought it. And I absolutely love it. It's my favorite nonfiction, and it follows kind of parallel events happening in Chicago in 1893. I think it's 1893. Let me double check that year. Yes, 1893. So it follows leading up to 1893, the construction of the World's Columbian Exposition, and at the same time, the construction of H.H. Holmes' murder hotel. I think it was called the Castle. But basically, this architect, whose name escapes me at the moment, Daniel Hudson Burnham, and he was building the Chicago World's Columbian Exhibition at the same time that Holmes was building his murder castle, so it was this interesting time where people were flooding the city to come to this exhibition, and a huge number of them ended up disappearing, never to be seen again because of America's first serial killer, H.H. Holmes. Serial killer, it's hard to say. He was, I think they confirmed, he confessed 27 murders, I believe, and they think he killed like significantly more people than that. But this book reads like a fiction book, even though it's nonfiction, and it's super meticulously researched, and I absolutely love it. I have another one of his books on my shelf down there that is Thunderstruck, and I fully plan to read that because I really love the way that he writes. And the next thing is a book that I read with someone, and I read The Book Thief with my best friend. We were in high school, and we tried to start a book club, and it didn't go well because we were the only people that showed up. But we read The Book Thief, and this was our first and only book for the book club. And this was fun because it was a reread for my friend, but I had never read it. I had never even heard of it. And I ended up sitting in the library with her a lot while I was reading it, and she reads super fast, so she reread it way faster than I got through it. But she enjoyed sitting with me and watching my alternating joy and horror. I thought these next two questions are kind of interesting. The next one is a book that you associate with a song. And I had to think about this for a little bit, but I ended up settling on The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. And I chose this one because I have this weirdly specific memory of sitting at home in my previous house. No, 2 houses before this. I used to live in a small town. I live in a city now. But when I lived in that small town, I had this memory of being young and laying in this little pool of sunlight on the floor and listening to The Pinnacle by Kansas and reading this book. I don't know why I remember that, but I do. So that's the one I associate with the song. And then this other one is interesting because it's a book you associate with a food, and I had to think about that for a while too, but I ended up going with Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein. This has a poem in it that's about a king who really likes peanut butter sandwiches, and his jaw gets glued shut by the peanut butter sandwiches. And then they spend years prying his jaw open, and then when they get it open, he just wants more peanut butter sandwiches. And we had an audiobook of this when I was a kid, and that was my favorite poem to listen to. So I associate this book now with peanut butter sandwiches. And saying that makes me want a peanut butter sandwich. And then the next one, this was also a hard one for me. I just scared myself. This one is a book that you bought years ago, but that you wouldn't buy now. Something that you wouldn't probably buy a second time. And I chose, I'm gonna drop it, The Girl Who Played with Fire by Stieg Larsson. I read The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo in high school, and I liked it, but it felt like it was really slow, so I decided I'd read something else for a while, and I never came back to read The Girl Who Played with Fire. We are almost at the end, oh my goodness. The next one is a book that you associate with a specific time in your life. So for this, I decided to pick The Legend of Holly Claus, which is written by Brittany Ryan and illustrated by Laurel Long. This is about the daughter of Santa Claus, who was born when a little boy asks Santa Claus, "But what do you want for Christmas?" And then she gets cursed by an evil warlock named Huracan, and it's all about her journey to kind of get outside of the North Pole, where she's been trapped since she was small, and it's about her experiencing the human world for the first time, and how she defeats the evil warlock Huracan using her kindness and just genuine compassion for humanity. And I it just really inspired me a lot, and I really wanted to be like Holly Claus because she was so nice, and she was this really interesting female character who's strong in part because of the things that I guess would traditionally be considered feminine about her, that she's kind and gentle and she loves people and she's just genuinely caring. And I just thought she was a great character, and I read this every year for Christmas for like, I want to say 7th, 8th, 9th grade. I read it for like 3 or 4 years, but that I kind of associate with like late middle school, early high school, and just a drive in myself to be a bit more like Holly Claus. Next to last question. The penultimate question. A book you used to like but don't anymore. I don't have anything for this because if I don't like a book, I don't keep it. And the last question is the newest book on your shelf. When I first pulled all of these, the newest book on my shelf was Punishing Disease, HIV, and the Criminalization of Sickness. I can't read my own handwriting. I'll put the cover somewhere up here. It is an academic book by a sociologist about the way that we use the criminal justice system to deal with the disease. But I decided I actually wanted to update it a little bit because between when I wrote it down and I'm actually filming now, I got 4 more books, and those are, one of them was Die and Stay Dead, which I've already pulled up, but I decided to just pull the one that I've actually already read out of the ones I just got, which is Circe by Madeline Miller. I got these, today's the 23rd, I got these 10 days ago, I got them on the 13th. I got Circe, Die and Stay Dead, The Count of Monte Cristo, and The Man in the Iron Mask, both of which are Alexander Dumas. And the cover appealed to me, and I heard so many good things about Circe that I just really wanted to read it. So I found a copy, and I bought it, and I read this in 3 days. I didn't read for I think I read for 7 or 8 hours one day and read most of the book. And then I broke up the last 2 sections over a couple of other days because I was a little busier those days. But I read it super fast. I absolutely loved it. I think I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads, or 4.5. But, yeah, definitely a new favorite. But yeah, that is basically the newest book on my bookshelf. It's the newest read book on my bookshelf that I actually have something to say about. So there you go. And that is the history of my bookshelf. I hope that you enjoyed learning a little bit about my bookshelf and about me. And if you like any of this, feel free to come back later when there's more videos. I hate to ask people to subscribe first video. That just seems, I don't know. I don't like it. So anyway, if you liked any of that, thanks. Thanks for thinking I am interesting. Yeah, I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.